Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Invisible Obvious podcast, a place for conversations to explore greater awareness, integration, and accountability for leaders today. I'm Daniel Paulus, your host, and it is my pleasure to welcome to the show today, or the podcast, Owen Phelps. Owen and I have known each other, I can honestly say, probably my whole life, growing up in small town, Northern Illinois. And Owen's mother was even one of the best friends of my dear, dear grandmother as well. So we go way back. He has been a mentor to me when I wrote my own book about my grandmother and also has offered ongoing advice. So I'm really pleased to talk with him today. And Owen, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Great to be together again.
Yes, always, always. So I like to let folks on these podcasts kind of introduce themselves and kind of talk about their journey, how they got to where they're at, and as succinctly as you'd like to. Mostly professionally, but obviously you have a wonderful family. You're going to lace into that conversation. So take us away with your story to begin.
Well, you gave away the name, Owen Phelps. I'm head of the Yeshua Catholic International Leadership Institute. We try and teach people how to be Jesus-like leaders, and that involves them being servants, stewards, and shepherds. It's kind of beyond servant leadership. And I think that middle one, stewards, is really important, particularly today in publicly traded corporations. We like to treat the CEOs or talk about them as if it's their company, and it's not. I mean, this simple, basic matter of law, they're stewards. And in most cases, we're all stewards. Our children are not property. I hope that's not big news to any of your listeners.
And you have six kids, right? Which you've
only five.
Only five, all right. So,
yeah.
Yeah. And I'm talking about your book here, so I'll plug it for folks if they want to know about it. Leading Like Jesus. It's introducing S3 leadership, which you're speaking about. You gave this to me a number of years ago with a beautiful kind of note, which I appreciate very much. And I've gone back to this. This is one of the premises around I'm trying to get at with the Invisible Obvious is leading people into this servant leadership, kind of lane. But go ahead and keep expanding on what you've been doing with the Institute in this regard.
Well, I was a journalist most of my life.
Right.
And that goes back to fifth grade, writing sports reports for fifth and sixth grade teams for the big junior high paper.
Right.
And stayed with that, got to college. One of my teachers happened to own newspapers, so I ended up working for them. And then he had it as an employee-owned company. It was really ahead of its time, and a lot of peer learning going on. And then he bought a group of papers down here, when I say down here, from the Green Bay area to the Rockford, Illinois area. And that's where I graduated from high school. Hadn't lived there real long, but my parents were there. It turned out my wife's mother was there. Her dad had passed. And I knew her as a girl from the Milwaukee area, but they were all down here together, and there was a chance to come down and be closer to them and run those newspapers. So we started with 5 publications, ended up with 10. And then at a certain point, I got recruited to be the diocesan newspaper for the Rockford Diocese. I'd been doing some volunteer work with them and helping them with electronic transitions. That was a big time. We were going into electronics in the newspaper business. And I'd been a theology graduate from college with no intention of really ever, quote unquote, using it,
Together, yeah.
I was married. I had a job. It was interesting stuff right after the Second Vatican Council. So I had a lot of questions and kind of got dared into doing it. But it all came together then with the editor of the diocesan newspaper, soon enough head of communications as well. So it was a chance to get into radio and television and the internet and really thinking of ourselves as a multimedia organization. So exciting times, expanded my world from, one particular place. Community newspapers are very rooted, to, I remember one year I covered work with the poor in Haiti and wrapped up the year shaking hands with Pope, now St. John Paul II. So,
Yep.
you kind of once in a while you go, huh? What happened there? And then later, while I was still working for the diocese, I went back to school, got my Ph.D. in administration and management, and by then was focusing on leadership.
Right. So you are officially the Dr. Owen Phelps, which I know you chuckle at a bit, but that has brought you some opportunity. And I love this backstory of being a journalist and then an editor and moving into the leadership coach, and the training, so to speak. So the one question I like to start with the leaders about is this idea of integration and awareness, right? For yourself as the leader, and then what you've seen in your training, because it seems to me it's quite needed more than ever before, and it's a little bit tricky, and maybe it laces into some of the work you've done with your book and your training.
Well, I think I learned most of it on the job. My wife and I came down here to run this group of newspapers. The only way our company could afford it is they were pretty broken down. At night, we'd cover the electronic machines with garbage bags because the roof leaked. And you learn you can't take people for granted. It's a very people-intensive industry. At that time, one of the markers was if your payroll was, under 35%, you didn't have a heart. But if your payroll was over 40%, you didn't have a newspaper anymore.
There you go.
So we were at 75% at the time, paying minimum wage. So you had to grow out of this thing, make the pie bigger. And,
right.
and we were able to do that. We were doubling our size every couple of years. And it was a real exciting ride. But we came down here. Neither one of us had ever had a journalism or business course of any kind. Now, I was lucky. I married a woman a lot brighter than myself who had wanted to be a computer till she saw that instead of being big buildings, they were coming down to, not quite handheld yet, but smaller. And she'd been a math major, so she got into the quant side real quickly, and I worked on the qualitative side. And we've never seen the world the same way, but we respect each other's views. So that was really a very nice arrangement. And later she went on and got into a tax business.
So highly complimentary there. It sounds like you're saying you learned to be a better leader by working with Joan, as a partner. Jane, I'm sorry, Jane, as a partner.
Mom's Joan, Joan. Yeah.
We go way back. There you go.
Yeah.
We go. So, I mean, what was the challenge in terms of understanding what you brought to it? You also were a parent, and had a number of kids, so you had to lead a family in a way. How did you have awareness or start to think about, boy, I should learn this part of what I need to know here and start integrating that into how to, help my organization move forward and the challenges that you had in the time?
In a word, desperation. I'd asked for 3 months to work with, go serve as kind of an intern in a successful newspaper chains. And I got one day instead. So I went to see the guy I respected most in the business. But I was trying to get my hands on everything, Inc. magazine, different entrepreneurial things, because we were really rebuilding this, this newspaper group. And in there, one day I went to a breakfast in Rockford, and there was this guy. He had a new book out called The 1 Minute Manager, Ken Blanchard.
Uh-huh.
And he was speaking at this breakfast thing. They had a copy of the book on the table. It's only like 99 pages, the original version. The type is huge, headline size type. The margins are about 2 inches on each side.
Right.
And I looked at it and I said, you know what? This looks like a book for someone who's too damn busy to read books. And that's me. So I picked up the book and read it, and it made a lot of sense. It really did. And Kim he wasn't using servant leadership at the time. Many years later, I'm sitting in his beach house in San Diego, showing him that book with his signature on it.
Wow.
From 25, 30 years earlier. And at that time, it was still self-published.
Right.
So
So give us a little background for the listeners that don't know Ken Blanchard. He's pretty well known, but just give us a snapshot of what Ken's legacy has been in the business world.
Well, Ken's headquarters looks like a small liberal arts college campus. He has published, co-published over 20 books. He's the best-selling business book. The 1 Minute Manager certainly was the best-selling business book ever. And the idea was that, most of us don't have a lot of formal education, but most of the decisions in an organization are being made by people, what would be called like mid-level managers. Or if you're the best writer, you get to be an editor. And if you're the best editor, you end up the publisher. And it's all on the job, but it's really never been taken apart. And so you got a lot of bad bosses running around in the world. And that bothered me. And we had the challenge here in a little town at that time of about 1,000 of trying to staff for all these newspapers. And, how do you do that? And how do you keep good people? And so we were constantly taking that apart in our 60-hour work weeks. And I had some definite ideas. And when I read his book, it was like, wow. And then later, when I met him the second time, he was doing Leading Like Jesus. And I went, what? So through a whole strange friend who lived in New York, I meet him in Florida. He asked about my Ph.D. program. I mentioned Ken Blanchard. Turns out he'd produced a series by Ken on Lead Like Jesus. And the next thing I know, I'm in a Chicago apartment with his co-author, Phil Hodges. And then later, as I say, in the beach house in San Diego with Ken. And they were having problems getting their notion of leading like Jesus any traction in the Catholic Church. They wanted to be ecumenical, but there's a little bit different vocabulary and such. So I said, well, maybe I can help you with that. And so I ended up with the book. We decided that day we'd do a book and Ken would do the foreword and we'd be, quote, in business, nonprofit business eventually. But, it's a learning curve, and it's still a learning curve. I'm trying to read 2 or 3 books a week now that I don't have full-time responsibilities. And, I have the sense, man, I just can't keep up. You got to keep learning, Yeah,
so it's true about anybody that's wants to be a leader, certainly, but just in a general. And I've always loved that about you. And you're a voraciously curious man and known for that, around town and around all the people that you interact with. So just tell me a little bit to end this part of our conversation. How did this led to the book? And then you took the book, you've been taking the book out over the years to do different trainings in different settings, right? And what has that been like, when you're getting in front of people to talk about leadership and servant leadership in particular?
Well, it's been a lot bigger than we ever thought. Although we call it international, we had that thinking that was going to be someday down the road. But before, in a couple of years, we were in Uganda. Since when you look at it, with Canada, Uganda, India, other people took a program to Tanzania. Yesterday, I was on the phone with people in Vietnam. They're translating it into Vietnamese. We've got it going on in the Philippines, translating it into Tagalog. So, I had no idea. I'd love to tell you it was great planning. 2 words, no clue. Stuff happens. Sometimes good stuff happens.
Right. Well, I think it's a testament to people of faith wanting to learn to lead like Jesus on a very base level. But I think you put together a book that's very well organized in terms of laying out the thoughts in a simple way, that doesn't get too much in the weeds for people. And then some visuals in the book that are able to help people just understand the holistic approach that you're making. So I want to congratulate you on that. I constantly go back to it. I hope to get to talk to some leaders about it who may certainly be interested in servant leadership. And if they have an interest in the faith-based angle, that's going to be one of my resources moving forward. So next thing I like to ask is about accountability. And what has been your experience with that in professional settings, right? So you've been a leader, you've had staffs, you've tried to motivate them, people have come and gone. This to me seems to be a real difficult thing, especially in society today when people are more willing to point and say it's somebody else's fault and not mine. And so I'm just curious what your experience has been to try to understand accountability, to try to bring accountability, both for yourself as a person and a leader, but also the people you're leading.
Well, the first time I saw that thought, I thought, well, I've seen accountability in countless ways, large and small, good and bad. Sometimes people are accountable, sometimes not. And then it hit me. The biggest accountability play that I've seen in my professional life was the Catholic clergy sexual abuse crisis. I just looked it up. It's the tuition's been $3 billion, if you want to put it in money terms. Yes. And that's an awful lot of good you're not doing, because you're paying for a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake. And the much higher price is the human tragedy. I've met with and I know people who I didn't know before it hit in Boston, but subsequent to that, it comes out of the woodwork, if you will. And the tragedy in people's lives, wow. And, I think the problem was a framing problem. And that gives me a chance to plug a different book called Reframing Organizations by Bowman and Deal. The last copy I bought was for a bishop. But what is the problem when these reports start to come to bishops? What's the problem? Well, the guy made a mistake, bad decision. It's curable. In most cases, they were sent to treatment. That was one of the framing things, and that's what the best science at the time thought. We know more now, the hard way. There was some indifference where it's like, okay, so he messed up, he says he's sorry, we'll move on. And, we're in the business of forgiveness. So, without really understanding it, you tended to do it. Some of it maybe was a good old boy network, this person's really valuable. We don't have a lot of extra priests hanging around. We got to do this. But in any event, people were reassigned, and that turns out to be the real crisis. Was a crisis of leadership, not just a crisis of some kind of, psychological obsession. I don't know all the medical words for that, but, then it became much bigger because of this leadership problem, the way they handled it and understood it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. We could talk about this for a long time, and it's been a lot of coverage, and interesting movie Spotlight talked about that, a couple years back. Great from a journalist perspective. So I appreciate you bringing that out in a very candid way, because it's something that is very painful to a lot of people on multiple levels. But I think what you're saying is accountability is important on multiple levels, right? But especially at the leadership level. If you can't hold yourself accountable for your own actions, but also with the people at the same level as you. So you got to, the council bishops, that were kind of, I don't want to say in collusion, but there was a blind spot there that they just did not want to go to. It really trickled down to create incredible problems for people at the different levels. And I wonder, I don't know how intentional it is in corporate America. I think a lot of CEOs and leaders are visionaries, and they're very good at speaking and painting a picture and trying to move things forward, but they may not have the awareness to be in more vulnerable conversations with themselves or the people that they lead, right? To get to this.
Yes, and the problem is you try and bring it in on yourself.
Right.
In the case of the Catholic Church, it was the concern about scandal. We can't let bad news travel. Right. Oftentimes that's true, particularly I think, in corporations. I've seen it. I've worked for corporations. I've owned corporations.
Right.
You don't want to look bad. It's all about good branding. And so you try and sweep this stuff under the carpet, which is a metaphor that's so old, it tells you how long the problem's been with us. And, it's you can pay me now or pay me later. In this case, right away coming out of this, they had a lay advisory board. We're going to spread this out. We're going to bring more people in because all of us are smarter than any of us. Right. And I had to ask myself, because I was recruited at one point for a communications job in Boston. And, ground zero. So not a day went by that the headlines didn't blare and I'd say, oh, thank you, Jesus, I didn't take that job. But, let the cup pass. But what would it have been like if there had been a woman at the table when that bishop and a couple of his leaders were deciding what to do about a man like this? What if that woman was a mother?
Yes.
There's a special kind of expertise here, which would have brought a whole new awareness, a whole new consciousness to the decision-making process.
100%.
So,
yeah.
as you bring more people in, and I don't just mean anyone, although the scriptures talk about if the people you invite don't show up, go out and find some on the sidewalk. But the fact of the matter is that more people should have been involved in this. We have to think organically. Organizations are not mechanisms, they're organisms. And organisms work a certain way. And probably the best description, and it's amazing, 2,000 years old, is Paul in the first letter to Corinthians, chapter 12, verses 4 through the end of chapter 13. He talks about a body. We are all parts of the body, and we all have a role to play. And a lot of people think, well, it's the head telling the body what to do. We wouldn't be here if we weren't breathing, and I don't think either one of us have told our body about breathing at all today, maybe not even yesterday. There's so many processes going on, interactive, that are shaped by feedback loops. The more we understand about a body, the more we understand about organizations. And, I think it's cool. Paul had a handle on this 2,000 years ago, but organizational gurus have been with this for a long time. And if you want to talk to a physicist, use the language of an open living system.
Yep.
It's the same stuff, but it's out there. It's known. People in the work world oftentimes don't have time for this, but there are people that know about it. And leadership is both an art and a whole host of skills. But it begins on the inside with what's important to you.
And your values. Yeah, that's music to my ears, Owen. You couldn't have said it better, really. And, the other thing I love about the book is in it, you talk about being a leader, but you also relay your experiences as a father, right? And being in a human organization of a family, right? Which is a very organic thing. We don't know what our kids are going to do. And that's as personal as it gets. So
most important work. When I came back from my emergency heart bypass surgery, I had a heart attack on Easter, as Easter was coming in. And so my own little resurrection, 3 surgeries that day. And afterwards, sitting upright is, a big achievement. And I said, okay, what am I here for? I had 2 people I knew died of the same thing within a couple of days of me. And why am I here and they're not? Survivor syndrome.
Sure.
And I decided that the absolutely most important thing I could do and be good husband, father, father-in-law, grandfather. Number 1. Number 2 was teaching people how to lead like Jesus. But that number 1 is right there. And I got a call about doing something with our website today. And I said, I can't think about that. I've got a wife in Paris who had emergency hip surgery. They're bringing her home Sunday.
Oh, my.
I got to get ready.
Well, so I appreciate time for me in this conversation today. Without that, I'm sure.
Commitments are important, but I'm not taking on any new ones for a little while.
No, it's that's beautifully said. And the interesting part about this work, and I know you've seen this when you've trained people, is once they get internal and more aware, it resonates not only in their professional life, but in their personal life. It has to, right? Because there's just, you're opening yourself up to see yourself more clearly. And that's what I'm excited about doing with my work moving forward, is really serving as a mirror and a reflector back to people. I'm not telling them who they are that's any different than who they already are. They're helping them know that and accept that better, and then accept who they're working with and try to find a way to have more relational clarity with themselves and with other people. So
you can't be self-centered. Because here's what happens. It's really pretty obvious. Not brain surgery, or they wouldn't let me near it. But when a leader is self-centered, focused on the self, then where are the followers going to focus? They're going to focus on themselves, because they have to. Nobody else is looking out for them. Well, now nobody's looking out for the mission of the organization.
Right.
No damn wonder it comes apart, you
Right.
know?
But you're
And
making
got to be goal-centered, mission-centered.
but I think you're making an important point there, because we're saying both, and you have to do your own work to understand yourself, right? To be aware of who you are and how you're perceived in the world, so that you can actually be a better servant leader in that regard. So you have a responsibility to do the personal work that is about you, but your other responsibility is to make it about the other people and how you're serving the other people, right?
Yeah, and that's because it can't be an either or thing. We have this heavy individualism, but the fact of the matter is that we become a person in community from other people. Case in point, you hear all this stuff about I'm a self-made man.
Yeah.
I could do that. I got $20 from my parents for college. So I could play that game, but stop and think about it. When someone tells me they're a self-made man, I step back because I know this. Control of bowel and bladder is socially learned behavior. If you're truly self-made, nobody taught you that. I don't want to be standing close. I'm sorry. That's how basic this thing is. We didn't create ourselves. We didn't invent ourselves. And we're part of a fundamentally interdependent network of reality. And so that's why this notion of, I got to love myself first before I can love other people. If it helps you think about it, okay. But the fact of the matter is, those kinds of things don't happen. We aren't silos,
right? You're talking to one of the words I use often in these conversations is community, right? And the sense of belonging. That's what everyone really wants at the end of the day. Of course, they want to be remunerated. They want to be appreciated. They want to, get some backslaps or whatever it is. But especially in society today with the digital technology and everything that is on screens and networking in that regard, what we're missing is community and a sense of belonging. And that's why I say to my kids, one of the few places you can still feel a sense of that, at least, is when you go to church, right? Because that's one place where people still gather. So we've had this gift, happen to be Catholic in our lives, where we know what that is, and it's innate to who we are in our experience. We want to share that, not in a necessarily evangelical way to try to recruit people, but to say there's a blessing and a grace that comes from community if you're willing to be open to what that can be. Is that accurate in your mind?
I think so. Exactly. Yeah. We just have to acknowledge where we came from, and really, the huge people that win Nobel Prizes and that, they talk about standing on the shoulders of the people who came before. We don't invent ourselves, and it's a great fiction, but it's not real.
Yeah.
And so the closer your perspectives come to the reality, the more likely the outcomes that you want will occur. It's if you're living in a fantasy world, no telling what happens next.
Indeed, my friend.
Yeah.
So I got a couple of questions left for you just to end our conversation today. We could talk for hours, but the first one is interesting to me. I'm working on this myself, but I'd like to know where other people are at. Where do you feel the most vulnerable?
Well, I'm not sure I want to answer that. No. I really think the most vulnerability I would feel would be my own ego.
Okay.
In our S3 leadership, servant, steward, shepherd, the little elevator speech is, servant, it's not about me. It's not about me. Steward, it's not mine. And shepherd, people are precious. So the danger is, I think sometimes when we're particularly in crises, the first one is like, whoa, I got to look out for old number one. Well, I got to remind myself I'm not number one in those times. That ego, the need to self-protect, consciousness, being conscious of our consciousness, an incredible gift. But once we see the self as other, then we go, okay, who's taking care of that?
Right.
And so we some people, obviously, especially if you're young, have no sense of that. I'm fine. I had one of my granddaughters. I said, she's got this attitude. What could go wrong? Some people seem to be born with that. And then those people, you sort of have to say, well, several things, as a matter of fact. Yeah. But sometimes, they learn that on their own. I hope they skin their knees rather than nosedive a 747 or something. But so they got to make mistakes, But that ego, self-protection.
Yeah, you make me feel better saying that, because it's a lifelong process, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Trying to be more vulnerable, especially as we get older, to let people help us as we need to be helped, and to help them as they need to be helped. So at your young age, my friend, what are you hopeful about moving forward then, with all the, I know you keep up with the news cycles, and we're in a crazy time, but what gives you hope?
Boy, I am just full of hope. I really am. I really have the sense that the Holy Spirit, the presence of God, is there. I mean, in everything. I'm not talking about like in church or. I really think, if you're a Christian, or if other monotheistic faiths for sure, and I don't know much about Hindu, Buddhism, things like that, but I think there's a sense, if you're really grounded, that you know how the story ends. You can be distracted by today's headlines, but hey, I know how the story ends. It isn't all on me. This, whatever it is, no matter how bad it is, isn't World War III. I can take a minute, take a breath, be calm, and try and see what's my small role in this. And chances are there is a role, but I don't put on the Superman T-shirt anymore. It doesn't fit probably anymore. But I'm just absolutely full of hope. I look at my grandchildren, 17 of them, and it's like, oh my goodness. And sometimes they help me with electronics. And I used to teach computers for a community college, and now I'm relying on the proverbial 5-year-old. Hey, how do you do this, honey? And that's the other thing. My dad made a big point of we can learn from everyone. And I think at the time, most people felt they could learn from people their age and older, maybe. But it's important to learn from people younger. Do we got time for a very quick story on that, or we run too tight? When computers were first coming out, I was helping school principals for the diocese get set up with communications, and you had to install communication software and open that software. It's a little more involved. But I got this principal call, and she said, "Does my computer have a modem?" Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you got to ask some questions, right? And I said, what kind of computer? It was an Apple. And I said, does it have anything that looks like a phone connection anywhere around it? I don't really know. I mean, she's averse to the whole thing. And I said, well, where'd you get it? And I thought, we'll send her back to the guy she bought it from, the store. And she said, well, one of our families donated it. They bought a bigger, more powerful one for their son. And I said, okay, well, is the son a student? Oh, yeah. I said, well, why don't you ask him? And there's a silence. And she says, he's in the 2nd grade. And, I should have just said, and your point is?
Exactly, yeah.
So what? But she was the knower and he was the learner, and they were locked into those roles. And yet, it's a pretty sure thing that kid could answer a question. And one of the principals at a larger forum like this asked if I could do a workshop, and I said, sure. And they said, who's got a building where there's a parking behind the building so no one will see us show up? And I thought, man, that's a terrible cross to bear, that you can't put yourself in a learner's role. And I think one of the things about being hopeful today is I think most of us are past that. Yeah. If you know the task, I got a Ph.D. and somebody else doesn't, but you know how to do it, so what? I'm going to shut up. The number of people helping me prepare for my wife, coming home. Yeah. It's I'm learning a whole lot of new things, and I think later today I'm going to learn how to put up a bed restraint, put together a bed restraint. I hope I can learn.
Well, you're a lifelong learner, Owen, and I thank you so much for making time today. Thank you for being you all these years. Like I said, you've had so much energy, so much curiosity. You've been a mover and a shaker, perceived that way, and I certainly learned from you. And you've been really supportive of me and my kind of journalistic exploits and media exploits. And I'm so grateful that we are friends and that you remain an influence. So I appreciate your time. I wish you the best with Jane, that all is well, and a wonderful holiday ahead. And just thank you for being you and for making time today, okay?
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me, and what an opportunity to see you again. And God bless you, man. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.